Pilate therefore said to him, Are you a king then? Jesus answered, You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? Welcome to What is Truth. I'm your host, Payton Arnett. Welcome back to What is Truth. I am your host, as always, Payton Arnett. And today, there's a quote that I stumbled upon, and it's a quote that I've heard before, but I wanted to address in this portion or segment of this show, because I found it to be very powerful, impactful, and it's a good illustration that I think we can learn a lot from in our pursuit of truth. So, the quote is a guy by the name of Robert Jastrow. And Robert Jastrow, I looked him up on Google to make sure that I'm getting this correct. According to Google, he was an American astronomer and planetary physicist. He was a NASA scientist, a populist author, and futurist. So, Robert Jastrow said something very interesting. This is a quote, but it's also very much a story or a parable, so to speak. And this is what Jastrow says. Keep in mind that this is a scientist saying this. He says this: For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the rock, the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been there for centuries. I'll just let you take that in for a second. I'm going to read that again. For the scientist who has lived by the power of faith and the power of reason. So this is somebody, he's saying the scientist places his faith in the power of reason. And he's putting faith in that, essentially saying he's taking a leap of faith to put his faith in the power of reason. For the scientist, the story ends like a bad dream, he says. He's saying that the scientist has scaled the mountains of ignorance, which is essentially what a scientist is doing, is trying to become less ignorant. And he's saying that he's about to conquer that highest peak. He's about to finish, he's about to break through the finish line. And as he does, he pulls himself over that rock. And he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been there for centuries. This is a powerful illustration. And first and foremost, before we go any further, I want to make very, very clear that I am not at all trying to suggest that science is not valuable, science is invalid, or that I don't like science. None of those things are true. Science is a very valuable tool. In fact, it is something that can lead us to truth. It is something that actually provides us evidence for God, provides us evidence for creation and for Christianity. There are countless benefits to studying science and to listening to what scientists have to say. But as Christian apologist Frank Turek says, science doesn't say anything, scientists do. So we have to wrestle with science, and we have to understand science's place in all of our discussions. And Jastrow, who again is a scientist, is making a powerful point here. He's saying that yes, this scientist can study his whole life. He can take in all the things about science. He can study the natural world his entire life. And by the end, he will only get there after an entire lifetime to a place where the philosophers and theologians have been for ages. Essentially, the idea is that science is the long route, and that philosophy and theology can get you there quicker. I believe that is, in essence, what he is saying. So we're not saying that science is bad. We're not saying science is incorrect or that it's not valuable. We are simply saying that science is a piece of the puzzle. That's what I'm claiming today, and that's what I wanted to bring to the table today. Philosophy and theology have their place as well, and that is really important to understand. When we talk about science, we are talking about the study of something that is an effect. When we talk about philosophy or theology, we are talking about the study of something that is a cause, right? Maybe you could even put philosophy somewhere in the middle, right? Theology is the study of God. It comes from theos, the Greek word for God. And philosophy is kind of it's hard to describe philosophy. It's almost like the study of the world around us and the life. And it's the correct view of the world, essentially. It's pursuing a correct worldview. And science is studying the physical, the literal, the tangible things, our senses. That's what science studies. The reality is that science is studying the effect, and the cause of that effect is what we study in theology. And I'd say philosophy falls somewhere in the middle there. People these days like to say things like, truth can only be found through science. I think this is very inaccurate for a number of reasons. I mean, let's go back to that quote again and think about this. If truth can only be found through science, then obviously those philosophers and theologians wouldn't be at the top of that mountain. But they are there. And I think this is an accurate depiction. I think we're going along the lines of the fact that this story is accurate. So what do we take away from this? What can we gain from this? Well, I think the simple answer is, let's take a weed, for example. If you are taking out weeds, right? You're trying to kill weeds. If you just rip the top off, you are temporarily fixing the problem, or you're doing a small portion of your end goal. But if you take out the roots, you have fixed the problem, because that weed will not come back unless, more seeds are planted. It's similar with theology and science. We can study science. We ought to study science, but I think science also ought to be studied through the lens of creation. Yes, we have the theory of evolution, but science can also lead us back to the cause. When we study science, we have to understand that it either leads us towards a creator or it leads us towards no creator. And science today, and I'm saying this, hyperbolically, because quite obviously science doesn't say anything like we said before. But science is going in a direction suggesting that the universe had a beginning. If science is leading us in a direction that the universe had a beginning, that means we ought to know, who is this beginner? Who caused the universe to exist? I like to call God, when talking about this sort of thing, the uncaused first cause. Who is the uncaused first cause? What's he all about? Scientists are on a quest for knowledge. They're scaling the mountains of ignorance. And theology is the study of the cause. Science is a study of the effect. And both are valuable. But we ought not allow ourselves to believe something as silly as truth can only be found through science. And the simple way to debunk that claim, by the way, is to say that, just ask the person, is that a scientific truth? It's not a scientific truth. Therefore, it debunks itself. If a claim debunks itself, it's invalid, quite obviously. It's a self-defeating claim. So where does this leave us? I think it leaves us where we ought to study theology and we ought to study science. And philosophy kind of ties those two together almost. When we study science, we're gaining knowledge about a creation. And that creation, when I study science, at least, in the very limited study of science that I do, it leads me closer to God, not farther away. Theology, of course, brings me closer to God. Theology is the study of God himself. And I think everybody ought to do theology. Even an atheist ought to do theology. Because theology is a study of God. So if you're an atheist, you should be studying whatever your God is, right? Because everybody has some sort of theos. Somebody has some sort of God, right? For an atheist, science essentially is God. So science to the atheist is, in a way, theology. Because for the atheist, for somebody who believes in, let's say, the Big Bang Theory, for example, they believe that the universe came like that into existence out of nothing. Thus, their first cause, so to speak, is the universe. And if the universe is your first cause, studying the universe is your theology. But there's something not right there. Because when we study science, we get brought to a conclusion that everything in the universe seems to have a beginning. It seems self-evident that the universe couldn't have come into existence out of nothing. This has become more and more evident over time. In fact, Stephen Hawking, who was a famous physicist, a very smart man, who, he died in 2018, I want to say. Hawking said that almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Do you see how science is leading us to theology? If science is leading us to theology, then truth obviously can't only be found through science. So I want to go back to that quote again. Let's circle back to the beginning. We're the scientists who's lived by faith. And again, another point to be made here is that the scientist is not somebody who is living only by hardcore evidence, and there's no faith involved. The scientist has just as much faith as the Christian does, or the theist does. Because the scientist is still putting his faith in the process of science that we currently understand. Every belief system takes a leap of faith. So he's saying, Jastrow is saying, that the scientist has placed his faith in the process of science and reason, right? Which is good. Believe me, I love reason, I love science. These are the sorts of things we talk about on this show. But they lead us in a direction. And for the scientist, it ends like a bad dream. He scaled that final rock. And when he gets to the top, he realizes he could have gotten there a whole lot faster through theology. So that's what I want to challenge you with today. I want you to think about, how can I incorporate theology and science into what I'm learning about the world? And what can that do for me on an individual level? And I think it can really change our lives, because we can get closer to God through the study of science if we incorporate theology. We can hit that highest peak quicker through theology, I think. So, I'll see you in the next section. God bless. Continuing on with the theme of quotes for this episode, I thought we'd take a look at another quote. That last quote was a quote about, it was almost a parable or a story that kind of proved a point. This quote is a different quote in a lot of ways. It's one of those quotes that people, talk about predicting the future. And I want to stick on that for a second. What do we mean about predicting the future, right? So, for example, a hilarious example is The Simpsons, right? People for years have claimed The Simpsons predicted the future many times. They predicted that Donald Trump would be president. They predicted the smartwatch. They predicted all these things. Well, yes, they did. But the question is how. There are people on the internet who will make jokes about how it's like a magic thing, or how The Simpsons writers somehow know the future. I think it's a lot more simple than that. And I think it's actually much more interesting than that. Because the reality is, no one knows the future but God, or to those God reveals it to. I mean, Christ himself said while he was on earth, not even the Son himself knew when he was going to return. So we can't really know the future. But we can make good predictions about the future. For example, I heard about this guy who had predicted like past 5 or so presidential elections. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember how many it was, but he predicted a bunch of them. In the same way, we can reasonably predict the future, not based off like magic or any sort of secret knowledge, but just based off reasoning, right? The Simpsons could predict something like the smartwatch because they could see how the world was going. And the Simpsons could predict something like Donald Trump being president because they could see the absurdity of where the world was moving. So, for example, G.K. Chesterton said this, and this is the quote we're going to dissect in this portion. If you don't know who Chesterton was, Chesterton, his name, once again, going to Google to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. Gilbert Keith Chesterton was his full name. Was an English writer, philosopher. He was a Christian apologist, so fitting right in with the theme of this show. And he was a literary and art critic. He's been referred to as the Prince of Paradox. Now, this quote from Chesterton that I stumbled upon is fascinating because I think it predicted the world that we're in right now. And it fits so perfectly with the theme of this show that I figured it was a perfect time to bring it up. This is what Chesterton said in his book, Heretics. He said, this is a little bit of Old English. He said, fires will be kindled to testify that 2 and 2 make 4. Swords will be drawn to prove that leaves are green in the summer. I really want to focus on that first part. He claims, and this is a long time ago, Chesterton lived from the year 1874 to 1936. So this is a long time ago. Chesterton says that fires will be kindled to testify that 2 and 2 make 4. So he's literally claiming that there will come a time when people will need to defend obvious truths such as 2 plus 2 equals 4. That was a tongue twister. Obvious truths. 2 plus 2 equals 4. What this is really talking about is objective truth. And this whole show is about the idea of truth. The title of the show is What is Truth? And we shorten that to wit because we ought to have wit when we're interacting with non-believers or believers. What do we mean when we say objective truth? Because people don't seem to understand these days what objective truth even is. There is your truth and my truth in the world today. But in reality, there's only the truth. And there's a lot of reasons and there's a lot of arguments we can make for that. And you can go back to like some of the earlier episodes of this show where we really dive into the simple concept. But truth has to be a standard outside of you and I. Because the idea of your truth and my truth is just absurd. Truth, by definition, in fact, let's do this. Let's Google what is the definition of the word truth. Truth. All right, let's see. Truth definition. According to Google, it is the quality or state of being true. Yeah, gee, thanks, Google. That which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. There you go. That which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. Notice how it's saying in accordance with fact or reality, meaning it's not whatever's in your head or whatever's in my head. It's whatever is in reality or what is true. Now, there's a second definition here that I would imagine is newer: a fact or belief that is accepted as true. Of course, a lot of these definitions on Google are kind of like, they're circular because it's like saying truth is true and true and truth. It's just kind of going back and forth. But truth is the idea of something that we can all accept as factual for everybody. So, how can you have your truth and I have my truth? For example, the easy example is Adolf Hitler obviously is wrong. And we all agree that it is true that Adolf Hitler is wrong. But what if he was just living his truth? Which he would probably tell you something along those lines. Maybe not those words, but he'd say, I'm just living my truth. The reason we bring this up, the reason that we talk about truth, because this steps on toes. I'm well aware that this segment of the show today is probably going to ruffle some feathers, although maybe not as much as the next segment. But it's going to ruffle some feathers because when we say your truth and my truth, there are people who say these things, and it's emotionally packed. There's baggage. But there's a reason we address it on this show. Everything we address on this show in some way needs to pertain to the gospel and to pursuing the truth of the gospel, because that is what truly matters. So why do we bring it up? Well, the line that the show is based off, that quote, that line, what is truth, that question, is a Bible verse. And again, you can go back to the first episode of the show where we discuss it. It's in John 18:38, and it is when Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? So why is it in the world today that so many people are asking the question Pontius Pilate asked Jesus? And I've heard political commentators talk about the same thing. The reality is this extends beyond the realm of religion or theology. But we're going to stick in the realm of religion and theology because that is the point of the show. So when we ask what is truth, we are in the same arena as what Chesterton was talking about. We need to understand that there's objective truths because 2 plus 2 has and always will equal 4 for every human being who's ever existed. It doesn't matter what you and I say or do. 2 plus 2 still equals 4. And we are absolutely in a culture that thinks that 2 plus 2 could equal 5 if I think it does. But the problem with that is that if 2 plus 2 can equal 5, that could also mean that Adolf Hitler is right. And if 2 plus 2 can equal 5, that also means that no law is binding to me because if my truth disagrees with the law, I should just follow my truth. Friends, this is why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but through me. Jesus claimed to be the truth itself because the truth has to be a standard outside of you and I that governs what is correct and what is incorrect, what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, what is moral and what is immoral. And morality is the center here. So Chesterton obviously is using the idea of 2 plus 2 equals 4 because it is a generally accepted truth that we all agree on. Notice how math is akin to morality. It is a standard outside of you and I that is objectively correct, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4, but can you tell me how much 2 weighs or what color 2 is? You cannot, because it doesn't have a physical reality. Just like murder is wrong, but you can't put murder on a scale and weigh it. You can't put love on a scale and weigh it. Moral relativism, I think, is one of the most dangerous ideas to the church and in the culture today. Moral relativism is a very dangerous idea because whether intentionally or unintentionally, when we push forward moral relativism, we are attempting to remove God. I'm going to repeat that again. An attempt at moral relativism is an attempt to remove God. Because God is the standard outside of you and I. God, in this analogy that Chesterton brings forward, is math. We cannot deny the standard of God by making up our own standard. That's not going to go well for us. I should say that we are able to do so. God has given us free will. We are able to make up our own standards. That doesn't mean they're true, and that doesn't mean they're going to be beneficial for reality. Chesterton is saying that fires will need to be kindled to defend that 2 plus 2 equals 4. He is literally saying not only are people going to claim that 2 plus 2 equals 5, but you also, as somebody who believes 2 plus 2 equals 4, are going to have to defend it. And notice how he says swords will be drawn to prove that leaves are green in the summer. Let me ask you this. Are trees green in the summer? So obviously it depends on what part of the world you're in. But generally, yeah, trees are green in the summer. So people are literally going to have to take out swords to defend trees are green in the summer. So I challenge you today: do not allow moral relativism to take control of you. Remember that God does not allow for moral relativism, and God is the standard outside of you and I. And that's encouraging because that means I don't have to come up with my own standards. I will see you in the next segment. God bless. So, I feel like I already kind of stepped on some toes with the whole moral relativism thing, but that's a hill I'm willing to die on because Jesus claimed to be the truth. So, if he claimed to be the truth, I'm willing to die on the hill of what Jesus claimed to be. Anyway, side note. I think this segment could also ruffle some feathers for different reasons. But I put up a poll, an anonymous Q&A link, I should say, and I've gotten a few people asking about this thing that I posted on Instagram. So, first of all, side note, I'm not a huge fan of social media. I don't like social media. You may think, oh, that's crazy, because if you follow me on social media, you'll see that I do post fairly frequently. Uh, Social media for me is a ministry, and it's a connection with people, but I also think that there's a lot of negatives to social media. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I do post on there. For one, because I want to grow a connection with anybody who may be interested in listening to the show or to other things I do. And there are reasons why I'm on social media, and it's not because I love social media. But I did go ahead and post a picture, and it was a picture that, at first glance, doesn't give off good vibes. And that's totally fair. That's why it's ruffled some feathers, why some people have been asking me about it. But I figured I'd take a segment to explain it because there's meaning behind this picture. So, I went to a concert, and it looks like, I'm looking back at this old post, this was in September. And I went to a concert, a Sandy Patty concert. Now, Sandy Patty is a Christian music artist who's, if you're younger, if you're around my age, you may or may not know who she is. But she came out to a church near where I'm at, going to college. And she went on stage, and I was involved at this church. So I actually got the honor of being able to be on stage with Sandy Patty while she sang God, I think it was God Bless America, as she sang that. And there were, how any Christian concert has like, let's raise money for this cause sort of thing. This is no different, of course. So Sandy Patty was raising money for a group that essentially brings Bibles to communist countries. Now, again, this is not a primary political show, and I don't think this is a political thing to talk about. But the reality is there are communist countries out there. I think their governments are terrible. I think that they're corrupt, and I think communism is an evil ideology. That's not what we're talking about here exactly. Sandy Patty is bringing Bibles to communist countries because in these countries, people are not allowed to have the Bible. So I think it's a worthy cause. Now, what happened was a friend of mine came up to me and essentially said, do you want to carry a communist flag down the aisle of a church? And of course, my immediate reaction is, absolutely not. I don't want to carry a communist flag down the aisle of a church. But when he explained to me what the analogy was there, I suddenly became for it. Because if you look at this picture, and I can put the picture on the screen, I'm on stage with a number of other people that I know, fellow students and friends, and we put duct tape over our mouths to represent the fact that you do not have free speech in these communist countries such as North Korea or Vietnam. And we also carried the flags in solidarity not with the government or with the country, but with the people. The flag was to represent the people of a country like North Korea, and the tape was to represent that they don't have freedom of speech. And we marched in to God Bless America, and a friend of mine carried the American flag in, higher and bigger than the others, because in America we do have freedom of speech. And in America, I can legally own a Bible, right? In North Korea, I cannot own a Bible. And that was the cause she was going for. So this was an illustration, an analogy of what we can do for the people who live under oppressive regimes, such as the regime of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And of course, when I post a picture of me on stage carrying a flag of a communist nation with Sandy Patty singing with the American flag higher, I understand why that would maybe bother some people. But I posted a description here that's a decent size explaining what the deal is. And I believe this is a powerful illustration. And it brings us to a broader point. And the broader point is this. First of all, don't jump to conclusions. I'm not attacking anybody because I got some comments and I appreciate the feedback. I got comments both online and in direct messages and in person, and I appreciate that. I appreciate feedback. I hesitated at first too. Like I said, when I was first asked to carry a communist flag down the aisle of a church while Sandy Patty was singing "God Bless America," I was skeptical too. But I was convinced of the analogy because I think it's important. And what does that analogy mean? It means that sure, America is a great country. I'm going to stand by that. I think America is a good country. And we live in a place where we have not only the ability to preach the gospel ourselves and preach the gospel to each other and to have concerts and to have money to put on those concerts, but we also have the resource and the ability to send Bibles to countries who do not have those resources. I think that's a worthy cause. I think that's a valid cause. And I think that look at where we're at in the world today. We in America, again, might step on some other toes here, but we complain about things in the United States that are just silly compared to what other Christians have went through, right? Oh no, I got banned from Twitter. I know. I don't want to be banned from Twitter either. I think it's wrong to ban people from Twitter. However, we act sometimes like getting banned from social media is on the equivalent level. We react the same way, I should say, as like you would expect somebody like Simon Peter to act when he's crucified upside down. Okay, we are blessed in this country. We are not persecuted in the way other Christians throughout history have been persecuted. I mean, literally in the first century, it was the blood of martyrs is seed, and Peter was crucified upside down. All of the 12 apostles were brutally murdered, with the exception of John. We live a pampered, safe life in the United States, and that's why it's important to like sing a song like "God Bless America." We are blessed to be able to practice our religion freely and be able to share it with other people. And there's a broader context here. I mean, literally, we how can we complain in the United States when somebody in North Korea is being put in prison or executed for having a Bible? You know how many Bibles I have on my shelf? If I look up at the shelf right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've counted 11 Bibles just within my eyesight right now in this room. And I have more of them. There's 2 more in that bag. There's another one over there. I have 15 Bibles. There are people in North Korea who have none. So when I posted that, I knew I'd get blowback. I knew that it would kind of shock people initially. But I believe it's important. I think it's important for us to understand that we in the United States, I am literally recording myself on a dang near $1,000 iPhone, posting it to social media platforms on a very nice, expensive desktop setup so that I can spread the gospel and do whatever God wants me to do. There are people who are starving in other parts of the world who they can't even imagine an iPhone. We are blessed. And we ought to be using those blessings to spread God's love to other people. And I think that includes other people in North Korea. And, I heard a concern, and this is I'm glad this person was thinking. I heard a concern from somebody that perhaps if we send that Bible over to North Korea, what if the person who gets it gets caught with it and then is executed? Well, for one, we're not at fault for what North Korea does. The whole point is that they can't have Bibles. But the person doesn't have to take it. What this group was doing is they airlift Bibles in balloons to North Korea. And they land, and you as a citizen of North Korea have a right to either take it or leave it. I think it's a beautiful option, and I think that the early apostles would happily die in order to have a Bible. Would you? And I'm assuming that most people watching this are in America. That's not maybe a fair assessment. But would you as an American willingly die for having a Bible? Would you willingly die for Christ? We're so pampered and blessed in the United States. In fact, that's where most of our problems come from, friends, is that we're so blessed that we forget that we need God. But if somebody were to come to you tomorrow and hold a gun to your head, what would you do? This is an important question we ought to ponder, because the early Christians, they didn't have to ponder this question. They knew what they would do because it happened. In fact, on the back of my phone case, I have a little fish, the Christian fish. And it says the word athis, which is the Greek word for fish. The early Christians are persecuted so much that the story goes that when they would meet each other on the streets, one of them would draw, half the fish in the dirt, and then the other one would draw the other half of the fish in the dirt, and that's how they knew that they weren't going to kill each other, because they knew they were safe. That's the kind of persecution the early Christians had. And we're worried about getting censored on social media. Don't get me wrong, I don't want people to be censored on social media. Free speech is very important, and we don't want an oppressive government. But the reality is, we're blessed. And that's what that post is about. And I hope that we can all remember how blessed we are. Let's thank God today for how blessed we are to be in a place where we can spread the gospel. And if you're watching this in a place where you can't, I'm praying for you. So thank you for those of you who reached out and talked about that. And hopefully this episode is a blessing. Hopefully it got you thinking. And that'll be about it. So thanks for watching this episode of What is Truth. God bless.